Greetings, folks. Welcome. All you need to do is take a look around, and it seems like small businesses are everywhere. Could be your favorite restaurant, a jewelry store where you found a cool necklace, your hairstylist, or the accounting firm that helps you with your taxes. Many of these types of businesses are small, and they provide a wide range of goods and services. A study conducted by David Birch many years ago found that small businesses are big in terms of job creation. Birch found that 66% of U.S. job creation from 1969 to 1976 came from businesses with 20 or few workers. Businesses with 21 to 50 workers accounted for 11% of U.S. job creation, and companies with 51 to 100 workers chipped in with 4% of U.S. job creation. That amounts to 80% of U.S. job creation coming from businesses with 100 or fewer workers. Certainly with these types of numbers, Birch's study and similar research created a lot of enthusiasm about small businesses and their impacts on economic development. In the years that followed Birch's study, other researchers revisited the topic of small businesses and job creation. And these studies used more recent data and different approaches that focused on net job creation. When you look at net job creation, you account for jobs that are lost as well as new job creation. Stephen Davis and colleagues conducted a job growth study that accounted for all four sources of employment change. You have jobs created when new firms begin operations. You have jobs that are lost when companies close. You have new jobs when existing businesses expand. And you have employment declines when existing businesses downsize. When you account for overall employment dynamics, the study by Davis and colleagues found that small manufacturing plants were no better or worse than large manufacturers at job growth. That's a very different message than what we learned from David Birch's study of small businesses. In a study that went beyond manufacturing and looked at all types of businesses, David Newmark and colleagues found that small businesses are only slightly better than large companies for job creation. Again, a far cry from Birch's bottom line that 80% of U.S. job creation came from businesses with 100 or fewer workers. Although studies about business size and job creation differ in their main results, an aspect of business size that is more universally agreed upon is that large companies on average pay higher wages. But in terms of outcomes such as growth and innovation, a survey by Eric Hurst and Benjamin Pugsley found that many small business owners do not expect to grow, report not wanting to grow, and never expect to innovate along observable dimensions. In other words, many small business owners are happy with being small business owners. So to wrap up some of the research, we'll look at how Kelly Edmiston summarized the role of small businesses in economic development. So he wrote, "Small businesses may not be quite the fountainhead of job creation they are purported to be, especially when it comes to high-paying jobs that are stable and offer good benefits. Big firm jobs are typically better jobs." With all of that as a backdrop, let's look at the size distribution of U.S. businesses as of 2014. And I should point out that these numbers focus on employers, so they do not include sole proprietors. So if a hairstylist is organized as a sole proprietor, they are not counted in these numbers. But if a hairstylist is organized as a business and they have one employee, they are counted in the data. The numbers clearly show that most businesses are very small. 73% have 1 to 9 employees, and 85% have less than 20 workers. Although 85% of the U.S. businesses have fewer than 20 employees, the workers in these companies only account for about 25% of U.S. employment. Larger businesses with 100 or more employees account for about 45% of U.S. employment, but these large companies make up about 2.5% of U.S. businesses. So I think it's safe to say that most businesses are small, but most people work for reasonably large companies. Let's take a look at the effects of business size on economic development, with a focus on businesses with fewer than 10 workers. On the y-axis, or up and down, you have the Economic Development Index of states. It's a combination of an employment growth index, an income index, and a third index that represents the persistence of employment, that is, the ups and downs of employment over time. As such, the Economic Development Index is a measure of the growth of good jobs in a region. On the x-axis, or side to side, we measure the percentage of businesses in a state with fewer than 10 employees as of 1990. We focus on the year 1990 because the economic development indices look at conditions starting in 1990 and moving out into the future. You'll notice that the side-to-side axis has values from about 70 to 80% of a state's businesses with fewer than 10 employees. You might recall that in 2014, about 73% of all U.S. businesses had fewer than 10 workers. The scatter plot has an upward sloping trend line, and I show it as a solid line because the positive relationship between the Economic Development Index and percentage of a state's businesses with fewer than 10 workers is statistically significant. In other words, small businesses are good for the economic development of states. Now let's move to the other end of the business size distribution and think about businesses with 250 or more employees. First, we'll look at the top 10 metropolitan areas for large businesses. The list shows, among others, Hickory, North Carolina, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, Dalton, Georgia, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Rocky Mount, North Carolina. If these places have anything in common, it's that they're all known as regions that are dominated by manufacturing. So as we look at the relationship between the economic development of regions and large businesses, we need to keep in mind that the percentage of businesses in a place with 250 or more employees might also be picking up the effects of manufacturing. On the y-axis of the scatter plot, you have the Economic Development Index of U.S. metropolitan areas. On the x-axis, or side to side, we measure the percentage of businesses in a metro with 250 or more employees as of 1990. You'll notice that the side-to-side axis has values from about 0 to less than 2% of a metro's businesses with 250 or more workers. These values are low because businesses with 250 or more employees are pretty rare. The scatter plot has a downward sloping trend line, and I show it as a solid line because the negative relationship between the Economic Development Index and percentage of a metropolitan area's businesses with 250 or more workers is statistically significant. In other words, large businesses didn't help the economic development of U.S. metropolitan areas. We just learned that small businesses help the economic development of states, and that large businesses don't seem to contribute to the growth of good jobs in metros. So let's drill down a little bit deeper into these results. This figure summarizes the effects of small businesses, again defined as having fewer than 10 workers, on the employment, income, persistence, and overall economic development indices. And I show the results for states and metropolitan areas. The height of the bars represent the size of the impact in terms of standard deviations when we increase a region's share of small businesses by 1 standard deviation. So the second to last bar on the right tells us that a 1 standard deviation in a state's percentage of small businesses corresponds with about a 0.35 standard deviation increase in the overall economic development index of states. The bars are shaded in red to indicate results that are statistically significant. Overall, the results show that small businesses are good for the various aspects of regional economic development, other than the stability of jobs over time. In other words, we don't find a statistically significant relationship between the persistence index and the share of businesses in a region with fewer than 10 employees. Now, let's look at a similar figure, except the focus is on large businesses with 250 or more employees. And it feels like we just moved the calendar forward and it's opposite day. That is, whereas the bars in the last figure pointed up, these ones are pointing down. It means that for all 4 of the indices we use to measure the economic development of regions, a place's share of large businesses has a negative effect, and it's statistically significant in 7 of the 8 cases we show here. So I think our summary of the effects of business size on economic development is pretty straightforward. The results show that having a high share of small businesses, which we defined as companies with fewer than 10 employees, is associated with better economic development outcomes. On the other hand, regions with higher shares of large businesses in 1990 performed worse according to the Employment, Income, Persistence, and Overall Economic Development Index. Although I'll have more to say about the relationship between economic development and business size in a different video, we can end now with some tentative key takeaways. I call them tentative because we might change our mind, at least a little, upon further analysis of the size of businesses in a region. So the first takeaway is that research on the effects of business size on economic development is mixed, and I think the results depend on the approach taken, whether you're studying job creation or overall employment dynamics, and also the indicator you use, whether you're looking at employment or wages. Second, we learned that most U.S. businesses are quite small, but most people, including myself, work for large companies. Finally, we found that having a high share of small businesses appears to be good for regional economic development. We'll end with a teaser for the next video. The topic of small businesses is so large that it takes 2 videos to cover. In the second part, we'll go through the rest of the story and attempt to reconcile the apparent puzzle that most jobs are provided by large companies, but yet regions with higher shares of large businesses performed worse. Also, we'll look into the fact, as mentioned earlier in this video, that the top regions for large businesses are also among the best known places for manufacturing. To be continued.